That's great. Thank you so much, Molly, and thanks for the invite to this lunch and learn. Hopefully, everyone can hear me okay and see the slides that are hopefully already up. I'm introducing this lunch and learn talk. So, as Molly mentioned, to introduce myself, my name is James Stix, and I work in the Information Services Group here at the university. I'm also an MBA candidate at the University of Edinburgh Business School, so this talk is mostly on the research I've been doing for the past few months as part of my final project there, with lots of insights and applications that have gone into my role. So it's great to have everyone join. Thank you for taking the time to come this afternoon. So I'll be sharing insights from my capstone research that was titled As We May Work with Artificial Intelligence, and it's research that really focused on sense making as a academic uh, theory, and how adoption of AI in organizations has been developing. So I understand we have about 45 minutes together, and it'll be good to allow some time for any questions or feedback at the end. So in that time, I'll walk you through some of the highlights of the study that I've been undertaken and have informed by my work in this area over the past few years as well, and have a more deep dive focus on how organizations are navigating this new wave of AI developments in some broader levels and also some domain specific levels as well. We'll have a look at some of the barriers and enablers and this framework that emerged out of this research that I've semi-formally called the FAITH framework, that can help leaders adopt AI responsibly and strategically across different domains. So yeah, take some notes along the way. I'll try and keep an eye out if there's any pressing questions and hands up. Otherwise, let's dive right in and start with a step back, where we can start and kind of see how both computing hardware and AI milestones have co-developed over the past 80 years or so. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the earliest kind of room-sized vacuum tube machines of, say, the 1930s and 40s, early on. Think ENIAC, that sort of thing. And these are giving way to the 50s and 60s mainframes like UNIVAC. And then by the 70s, we saw mini computers that resemble much more what we have nowadays, shrinking that footprint further to the personal computer area, IBM's PC, Apple II, so on as we move on to the 90s and 2000s. When networking and the internet became more mainstream, we've seen the rise of mobile devices and cloud computing. And in the 2010s onwards, we kind of have this era now that's emerged of massive data centers, sophisticated GPUs, large-scale AI services that are being deployed across different industries. So next on the right, we have that kind of visual track of our AI timeline that's developed alongside this history of computing. So starting with the 50s, we have, of course, the post-World War II have Turing machine development and this proposal for a Turing test to try and develop a metric of how machines actually compare to humans and how we understand them. So over the last few decades, we had the first chatbot in the late 60s. We had a couple of AI winters, largely due to government funding and waning interest in the academic and research fields. But that's picked up again and come in phases. In the last decade, we had a lot of consumer products that have integrated AI in lots of different ways. Siri, IBM Watson, winning at Jeopardy, that sort of development and milestones in how AI has reached new areas of potential over the past couple of decades. And more recently, we've had a lot of more interest in broader governance, controversies of how we use AI, how they reach consumer markets. And the EU published its ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI a few years back in 2018 as a major policy milestone. So let's fast forward a few years to more or less the present, and we can imagine where AI is headed over to the next decade. On this slide, you'll see a simple table that informed part of the research and tracks progress across 5 different areas. So the main ones that we see a lot of modern AI being used in: text and code, images, generating video, and have 3-dimensional gaming graphics, that sort of thing, broken into 3 phases. We have first attempts that took place mostly before 2020. What's almost there from 2020 to 2022, ready for prime time is where the hype cycle is at its peak, and where we might see some of these technologies develop into the 2030 with some speculation thrown in there that makes it uncertain how these technologies will continue to develop. So when we think of first attempts and of the early days of a modern form of AI that's developed alongside this timeline of computing and AI. We can think of them as Mad Libs for AI, as rule-based templates. The earliest have natural language generators. In terms of code and images, they can maybe autocomplete and help you debug a little bit. You have things like Tab9 and Jupyter embeddings and Kite, which give you the next word in your script, or try to suggest a word, or try to suggest a term or a piece of code that you might be able to work with. Then that developed into more sophisticated, more modern technologies that we see using AI. Less things like rules-based NPCs and more like Roblox creators that use AI in gaming to help build levels and characters. And suddenly small studios can do more with less. Say in images, you have diffusion models that can make photorealistic images that have really had a significant impact and ripples across the art world. In terms of code, Codex Alpha, things like that have shown that you can turn plain English into chunks of working code and have given you a first taste of text to product when it comes to the codification of software and of applications. And so that leaves us at a point where we're looking to speculate ahead, looking to understand what's going to be the impact for organizations, how can we make sense of these technologies. So in 2023, we can see that AI can develop final drafts that maybe rival what some professional writers might be turning in. There's a lot of questions around authorship, ownership of the output that you might co-generate. You have co-writing assistants that can adapt to your style and work across different languages and translate. You can have AI as a kind of almost full co-author, drafting blog posts, writing white papers, even novels alongside of you, which might not be very good at first generation, but you can work with them. So there's an infusion of these technologies into our everyday life that can't be missed. And you also start to see significant industry applications in 2023 onwards, from GitHub Copilot maturing and helping to develop end-to-end text to product pipelines in an IDE for helping developers create applications and work together using AI. We see, as of this year, as of the last year or two, one prompt app builds. We see self-healing code bases start to emerge as applications and ideas for the future. We start to see speculation around real-time VR and AR asset creation, so where designers can speak and then environments appear, and designers can input requirements and environments appear. We're starting to see in video AI-generated trailers, VFX for indie films. This is starting to have significant effects on the industry of how you can create content at different sizes, at different scales, and that's what some of the research ended up focusing on in terms of organizational setup. We'll have a look at in upcoming slides. And when it comes to gaming, we have some speculation that maybe in 5-10 years we'll see AI dungeon masters running persistent, evolving universes that are tailored just for you. Right now, we see you can procedurally generate worlds that respond to your play style and create different adventures. So you have this emerging mindset or evolving mindset around the reproducibility of final products, and if users can tailor them to what they like, what their interests are. So with all this information, what does this tell us about AI, how we can make sense of it, and how organizations make sense of it, and what's reaching industries and markets? So first, each leap that we've seen in hardware and algorithms unlocks new possibilities, from clunky early demos to professional grade outputs. So by 2025 onwards, we're looking at routinely instructing AI to help us build apps, to craft more immersive worlds and entertainment, co-write content across different fields. And maybe by 2030, AI will be more deeply woven into nearly every creative and technical workflow and working alongside us as true partners. So as we might dream big about these future capabilities, we need to remember we also need guardrails, ethical frameworks, governance, and clear strategies. And these need to make sure that AI benefits everyone and avoids unintended harm. And I see this a lot in my role because we deploy a lot of tools that impact thousands of users at once. So that's exactly what research and the resulting framework that have come from this research will help us navigate, hopefully. So before we dive into the faith framework and of what this research was motivated by a bit further, let's take a moment to think about these milestones. Any questions that you might have for later on. So now we have a bit more context. We can talk about how AI, especially in the modern likes of generative AI and ChatGPT, etc., seems to be everywhere these days. So we see it powering chatbots, driving marketing personalization, helping with complex data analysis and everyday tasks. So it's not just a futuristic concept, it's here and changing kind of how our workplaces function. So from speaking with many managers and professionals, what I found was we're still figuring out a fundamental question of how we as organizations fit these new AI tools into our everyday work. It's not just about installing and using new software, it's about realigning teams, roles, and mindsets to get the best of what new technology has to offer and how this new technology shakes the ground beneath us as we reconsider what we're standing on. So when I first embarked on the research, I was really interested in one core issue. If AI is so game-changing, why aren't all organizations essentially effortlessly jumping on board with it? For those that are, did they think through the decisions enough and how can they stay ahead of the curve? And also ways we can tell what the right choices are and when it comes to new forms of AI and technology and their maturity over time. So at the start of the project, the main question became, how can we adopt AI in a sustainable and people-friendly way? And I'll talk about that a bit more later in this augmentation versus automation debate. And making it value-driven so that organizations can make effective use of it. And digging a bit deeper to answer this, there were some supporting questions like what are the barriers, be it compliance or skill gaps, the enablers like leadership support that influence effective AI adoption at the organizational level, and how have technology acceptance models evolved over time, and which ones can we use to make effective use. So this helped us design a model that helps us humans collaborate more effectively with AI rather than feeling displaced by it ultimately, and think about what broad risks could be left out of business decision-making processes by managers and organizational leaders alike. Because as amazing as AI can be, there are real concerns around ethics, jobs, data privacy, and so forth. They need to be put into the design phases before anywhere near the implementation phases very often. So next, I'll walk through some of these findings, some of the key literature insights, and what led to the strategic framework that I've mentioned. So on this slide, you can see some of the core insights from the literature review that was part of the research and formed the foundation for kind of the design and the surveying that took place later. Starting with sense making as a foundation, we learned from academics like Weick and Uberlacher that organizations don't just turn on AI, they collectively construct using a constructivist terminology, meaning over time, and those teams hold demos, they run cross-functional workshops, they're meeting frequently and telling each other stories of how they're interpreting the broader world out there and what's impacting their organization and their business. So when it comes to translating AI's abstract capabilities into concrete impacts on daily work, you have to really think about co-designing AI solutions within existing routines, and companies need to maintain strategic alignment and avoid treating AI as a siloed experiment in any way most of the time. The thing I mentioned just a moment ago, this kind of sense-making, meeting automation versus augmentation when it comes to technology adoption. There's a lot of clear evidence that automation of repetitive tasks might yield efficiency gains at an organizational level, but the greatest strategic value comes when AI amplifies human judgment and creativity. So as mundane processes or more mundane processes are offloaded, new kind of human-only skills like complex problem solving and cross-team collaboration and innovative thinking, those become the real source of competitive advantage. And this kind of fits into an evolving context for organizations. So this leads to platform and ecosystem thinking, and leading firms have shifted more from standalone AI pilots to more platform-based approaches that leverage data networks and external partnerships. A lot of these make use of scale really well, like Microsoft, like the big players, and other ones make use of existing open source data really well. There's concepts that became quite integrated into this research, like federated learning, which lets multiple entities or organizations train a shared model without exchanging any raw data. And this can help boost collaboration and preserve privacy and navigate regulatory constraints. And that's really helpful for kind of large institutions like universities or major market players. And universities already make use of federated approaches in a number of ways, such as authentication and authorization of different journals and systems at universities. When it comes to the structure of organizations and kind of the culture of organizations and adaptations that need to take place for effective AI adoption, success with AI demands more than just the technology. It really requires a lot of organizational flexibility. And the literature sees that the rise of dedicated roles, like, for example, chief AI officers or AI competency support officers, in many ways has improved the ability for cross-disciplinary iterations to rapidly learn from these new technologies. And equally important are the cultural rituals like regular lab storytelling sessions, stand-ups, internal showcases, that sort of thing that demystify new technologies and help create a sense of unity when adopting them, builds trust and sustains momentum at the organizational level. These are kind of called in the literature sensitizing events or gatherings or concepts that make up the raw material for building a recipe around sense making, and can be a useful way of thinking and acting in organizations. So finally, the literature and a lot of the results that we got from our research stresses that ethical guardrails and robust data governance are really non-negotiables at the organizational level, trickling down to how employees perceive and build perceptions of the organization. Without transparent processes and bias mitigation practices aligned with frameworks, like, for example, the EU acts that I mentioned, or GDPR, AI initiatives can really stall and risk eroding stakeholder confidence, or worse, can actually cause harm through unintended manipulation. So taken together, these are some of the lenses: sense-making, augmentation, platform and organizational and cultural readiness, and governance. These really made the kind of conceptual scaffolding for the methodology that we'll go into next. So really to try and cut through as much of the AI buzz as possible, I took quite a mixed methods route. Firstly, sitting down with as many AI insiders as I could find, being a part of the university, whilst it meant being exposed to one institution mostly. I was quite lucky to have that exposure to lots of different academics and people from industry. I'm meeting with them to share kind of as unfiltered as possible what really helps or hinders of AI adoption at an organizational level. Alongside that, I ran a broader survey with 30 practitioners around finance, healthcare, education, and more areas to see whether those early themes kind of held true in different contexts that we picked up in the literature. To make sense of the data, I brought in 3 classic technology adoption lenses. So these were the technology organization environment framework, which has been a popular framework that helped learn how to spot, from regulatory pressures to in-house skills and leadership styles, different influences in an organization's AI journey. The technology acceptance model has been widely used in a number of different domains and industries. I've always been curious about why some tools take off while others languish in their mid-development. So I looked at perceived usefulness and ease of use as key drivers of whether teams actually embrace AI. And finally, this was part of a business-oriented management program. So I took the resource-based view and asked what unique assets does AI unlock? Can it be proprietary data, specialized talent, novel algorithms or improved algorithms? These are kind of the building blocks of a lasting competitive edge that these tools enable, or a lot of the organizational leaders that I spoke to thought would enable. And so by weaving these qualitative insights from survey data and interviews and grounding them in have well-tested theories, this helped me find not only what's happening on the ground, but also why organizations make the choices that they do, and how they can position AI as a genuine strategic asset, not just a flashy upgrade, kind of stuck in a hype cycle. Now there's this consideration of how people make sense of things in the literature, like AI and technology acceptance, and the models that were in the last slide, as being kind of new organizational initiatives and ways of thinking about organizations. So sense making really is the glue that holds the research and the way to look at AI strategies from the research together, helping people in the organization move from asking the question, what is this, to how do we use it? There's a few things I've laid out on this slide to show some of the tools and visuals of why sense making matters and how you can begin to apply it in an organizational setting. So starting with the breakdown of the different generations of technology models that were analyzed in the research, we have this kind of technology push from the 1950s, largely stemming from governments having done a huge amount of government spending pre, during, post-World War II, and innovations being driven by lab research. You start to see universities developing mainframes and more symbolic forms of early AI. Then you had the market pull of the 70s and 80s, where you start to see more commercial demand for these new and interesting tools that we're developing, largely out of academia, and being integrated into more expert systems in organizations like banking, manufacturing, and diagnostics. Later, coming into the kind of internet age, in the 90s, you started to see statistical methods that meet business needs, and that was called the kind of push-pull synergy generation of technology acceptance models that organizations were kind of using or was in their mindset. Think data warehousing and decision support systems. More recently, kind of late 90s, 2000s, you saw the rise of GPUs and cluster computing, higher performance computing, that have made large-scale modeling feasible, and a lot of the networks that we see in IT feasible. And more recently, kind of mid-2000s towards the present, you've seen neural networking and have a renaissance almost in some of the theoretical concepts that were developed largely in the 50s and 60s around AI and the possibilities for neural networks. So this is characterized mostly by deep learning, and that's fueled by massive data that obviously is only possible from what followed beforehand, or following what came beforehand, having massive data and compute, and that's powered today's breakthroughs and capabilities for GPTs and LLMs. This table just really reminds us that each wave of capability needs its own organizational lens. Your sense-making practices kind of need to evolve as the technology does. And with this timeline in mind, we can consider some findings from the literature that show us how people make sense of the technologies. We have an evolution from perception to intention and finally the behavior. And then that hits the kind of context of the organization of what makes the business unique and how it needs to actually be applied behaviorally to meet the function of the organization. So starting with perceptions, some basic questions. Is AI safe? Is our use for it safe? Is it fair? How is it being perceived by members of the organization? What are its uses? What do people actually think are its uses? Because those can be very different things, even if they mismatch what it says on the label. In terms of intentions, that follows and asks, will I try it? Will we invest in it? Which driver will be most picked up in people's behavior in the organization? And then behaviors are the experiences and perceptions that actually get launched in pilots once budget gets approved and workflows are actually changed at an organizational level. So without explicitly addressing perceptions, an AI program can really stall at the intention stage. They can be great pilots on paper, but have zero real-world impact. And then you have key sense-making questions and kind of the technology adoption curve to think about over time. So here organizations need to go back to basics and consider what makes the business truly unique. Where can AI unlock differentiation, not just efficiency? How do you focus most on augmentation, not automation, unless you're specifically set out for automation? And that's kind of a different talk or different conversation around AI. Who are our innovators and early adopters, and how do we bring them along? And then you can plot these initiatives on the classic technology adoption curve that helps target the right projects and the right people at the right time. And lastly, there's this conceptualization of collective sense-making. How does this all work together, both inter-organization, in between organizations, and intra-organizations within the organization itself? And one way to do that came out of the research was this idea of federated learning. Again, this kind of sense-making example of collective AI use for organizations. Again, federated learning helps train models across multiple data holders. So that could be banks, hospitals, branches of different organizations, or even of the same organization that are siloed without sharing raw data. And that matters because it helps overcome challenges around regulation, so that can comply with privacy laws better, GDPR, HIPAA, because data never leaves its source. In terms of competition, it helps industry consortia that can collaborate on better AI models without losing their secret sauce, their secret algorithms and data. It can also yield richer capabilities and more robust models by tapping distributed data without centralizing it. So some of the things that emerged from the research found that introducing this type of method of federated learning into sense-making conversations can help show at an organizational level how you can balance regulatory constraints, competitive strategy, and technical ambition, both from a functional perspective and an organizational marketing perspective, where you are demonstrating who you are and how you work to others through the signals that you're showing and how you're making sense of broader things happening in the world out there. So in summary, sense making isn't really this one-off workshop or something that can be summarized into a slide. It's this multi-dimensional process where we're all doing it all the time, individually and collectively. Tracking technology evolution, we have drilling into how people think and feel, mapping projects into adoption curves, bringing in innovative patterns like federated learning. These things can help align an organization's culture and strategy, and ultimately capabilities around AI adoption and use. And this slide just digs a little bit deeper into how sense making happens. It happens at two levels, really, as shown in the research, inside each of us and together as teams, as I mentioned. In the age of AI, decisions are only as good as the sense we make of the world around us, and that's a complex process. So how do we move from chaos to clarity and individual thinking to collective thinking in organizations? That usually starts with a trigger that something changes in the environment. Maybe stakeholders need a new shift, a new market need. There's a new technology or a sudden crisis. So that moment is usually called a catalyst when it comes to sense making and sparks this need to make sense of what's going on in a new way, and question the existing construction of how we think about something. So in AI terms, this is kind of the input stage. Like we absorb signals from the world. AI models are fed raw data, but the challenge is still the same. How do we interpret what really matters and how we use them? So next, individuals start to interpret what they see. And this is where it can get a little bit messy when new technologies come along. As we all bring our frames or schemas to the table, openness to change, political learnings, health, mental models, and cognitive biases. That mix of thinking and feeling determines how we make sense of things, and applies in a technology acceptance framework of organizations as well. So this variability is a huge challenge in management in particular, and in technology acceptance, because decisions really don't happen in isolation at all in organizational settings. And when they move into dialogue and into collective sense making, that's where teams try to find a shared frame of reference, which can be challenging when everybody has different priorities, timelines, and things on their plate. So this part can be particularly interesting for research on AI. There's a lot of existing literature on how generative and collaborative AI tools can actually support this stage and can surface different perspectives and reframe problems, ultimately helping us to get shared understanding faster, which drives a lot of market needs. In the end, this isn't about AI replacing group discussion, it's AI enriching it, or at least it should be. That's what collective sense making shows. It should be applied when we think about organizations making sense of new technologies. So to say once we agree on the problem, we start strategizing, we have to ask what are possible options, what are the risks, costs, and benefits, and be candid enough about those, and create sufficient frameworks and process for that to happen constructively. This is where some of the research respondents said that agentic AI can play a big role. It can run simulations, it can stress test assumptions, help individuals propose alternatives by brainstorming things. But we have to get used to this idea of a co-author maybe becoming a new norm to how we go about thinking day to day with aid from machines and how we work. But again, always in dialogue with human priorities and judgment in mind. So finally, we make a decision collectively using sense making based on consensus, and where we can move from understanding through strategy and interaction, going from left to right on the slide. And this part really matters because the decision has to align with the values, objectives, and the long-term impact that organizational leaders generally have to aim for. And that's what justifies it. So ideally, we're also feeding that learning back into the organization in a systemic way, using both the kind of human talent and skill and what AI can do as automation, augmentation, machinery. And so here's the big idea that this slide tries to get across, is that sense making is how humans really manage complexity. And AI, if designed ethically and used thoughtfully, can actually scaffold that process a bit and help us make better decisions a bit faster and with more awareness of the system around us. So of course, there's that individual sense of how each person forms mental models of AI and what it can do. There's the collective sense of when teams, departments, or an entire organization have to interpret AI together as part of transformational program, new procurement, or a new partnership, for another reason. So creating the sense of shared language, aligned expectations, and coordinated action at an organizational level becomes the key thing to pull out of this. And a practical tip becomes to design a change program that can balance both self-paced learning and also regular group coverings of new technology adoption. So just before we go into some of the actual findings of the research, we can zoom out for a moment and look at the landscape of adoption across UK sectors and business sizes and scales. So this is where we can start to spot patterns and gaps that matter when thinking about strategy and implementation at organizational levels. So firstly, by sector, legal and the legal sector is leading the pack. We've got IT and telecoms that use AI to personalize lots of services and optimize networks. Think recommendation engines, that kind of thing. Then manufacturing, retail, education. These are sectors that are still catching up in ways due to data privacy concerns, the weight of legacy systems, and in large part, some of the scale that we work with in large institutions like a university. With that said, though, large enterprises are way ahead, with 63% having adopted some form of AI. They've got the resource, they've got the talent, the data pipeline to deploy and scale AI more quickly. Generally across larger scale organizations and businesses, medium-sized firms are making progress at around half of that, 32% of them having adopted some form of AI by the time the survey was taken, and often using AI to gain a competitive edge in crowded markets. For small businesses, adoption is still quite low, not because they necessarily don't want AI, but because they have to decide on investing in AI as part of a more constrained set of choices, and often lack the budget or in-house expertise to adopt AI significantly, or even having a clear use case within the remit of the organization. But this is important. They also stand to gain the most from plug and play AI, easy to use platforms, ecosystem level support. Small firms have a lot to gain from what's happened in recent developments. And so here's in some more detail what was found in the research from the interviews and the surveys. When it comes to adopting AI in real organizations, it's a bit of a push and pull story. On one hand, you have real hurdles. They're consistent across sectors and roles. First and foremost, data privacy and security. So nearly every organization or member of organization I spoke with ranked it as a top concern. Rightly so, as no one wants to risk a leak or mishandling of sensitive information, especially involved in models that might be using it for training for different purposes. There's leadership hesitation. So for some, it's lack of understanding. For others, it was classic risk aversion, being hesitant to commit to something without a guaranteed return when you're managing budget allocations. And finally, a regulatory landscape that's fast evolving, especially in finance, in healthcare, and in education, and particularly higher education. This ambiguity can make compliance officers and CFOs understandably nervous. But a lot of the respondents said, let's not get stuck on the obstacles and shed light on a lot of opportunities that they thought were fairly realistic. And there were clear enablers to accelerate AI adoption and its uses. So top of the list was senior leadership's buy-in. When C-suite champions AI as a strategic priority, things can move faster. So budgets get unlocked, teams can align, and momentum builds when done effectively. Also, the quality and accessibility of having AI tools is light years ahead of where it was a few years ago. So there's excitement of, well, we just don't know how good this can be or how much better it can be. Now just having generative and agentic systems that are powerful and usable, that can easily get caught up in a hype cycle, but it can be a significant factor in the buy-in of organizations. But most importantly, where I saw the most success was in cross-functional collaboration, when IT, when marketing, ops, when operations, and HR all have a seat at the AI table. Initiatives are stronger and stickier. They last longer. Again, because you have this greater sense of collective sense making of what this tool means, because you've all been in the same room, perhaps even virtually, and talked it out about how you think you might be able to implement this in a constructive setting. So you'll see on the slide, there's a snapshot of some survey respondents, people from across functions, AI managers, HR specialists, some functional specialists like geospatial analysts, students, business development leads, That was a nice diversity of perspective as we think about AI implementation that cuts across silos. And the big majority also says sustainability really matters when adopting AI. And this is really important because it's not just about performance or efficiency really anymore. It's about aligning AI with the bigger organizational, structural, and cultural picture, purpose, responsibility, and impact of the organization. So the takeaway here is that the barriers are very much real, but the enablers are as well. So if we can align strategy from the top and invest in some of the right tools for our organization in particular, that can help foster collaborative literacy of AI and collaborative adoption of AI across teams, and can also help distinguish which are the best places to distribute what kind of AI, because you have a greater sense of collective distinguishing when more functions are involved in the conversation or more departments. This can help with AI adoption not becoming a catalyst, becoming more of a catalyst and not becoming much of a cost, but as much as it needs to be. And so now that we've seen some of the barriers and enablers and what's at stake as well, the big question in the research became, how can we make AI adoption actually work across different teams and sectors? So some of that's what led to develop this FAITH framework, and that stands for a federated, from the federated learning that I touched on a few slides back, federated AI teamwork heuristic, and that integrates this kind of collective sense making and having heuristics in place for when people are making sense of an understanding of and building knowledge around new technologies and accepting them into the organization and adopting them well. This framework, the FAITH framework, is built around 5 interconnected principles, shown there probably in quite the small table. Sorry about that, but happy to share these slides with anyone if you want to zoom in a bit more later. And it's built around these 5 interconnected principles that have together supported scalable and sustainable adoption across teams, and all informed by the key literature insights and what we found from the surveys and the interviews. But also looking at different departments and scales and leadership levels for the implementation steps of AI adoption. So with a bit of the framework unpacked, of course, one of the last questions became, how do we actually put this into practice without getting lost in any of the hype? So we have things like hype cycle models, the Gartner hype cycle model that I use as an example on the slide. They can be a useful lens and they can be built upon. So AI adoption often starts with some inflated expectations, to be honest, and then it hits that messy trough of disillusionment, possibly that we might be seeing or we started to see in some industries. But also with the right structure, we're starting to see that we can move deliberately towards sustained impact, and maybe make that trough as minimal as it needs to be, or skip it altogether, possibly in some industries and in some cases. So in terms of the steps that we need to take, and what emerged from the research into a cohesive framework, was first to assess and pilot what the specific use was. So starting with a few carefully chosen pilot projects that can align directly with business goals, keeping the scope manageable and defining clear success metrics, making sure this wasn't about launching AI everywhere overnight, but that people still felt involved or communicated with about an organization's use of AI. As kind of seeing it as a strategic element in an organization's wider strategy that senior leadership is communicating on. Then AI adoption really can die without AI literacy being in place or being developed effectively alongside it. And this is really key when it comes to investing in people through whether it's workshops, mentoring, interactive demonstrations, actually putting time and effort into things that will work in collective sense making. And the key there is making AI essentially relatable and show how it can take drudgery off a plate, not just add another layer of complexity, but with that said, also making sure that its risks and its complexity is being accounted for in the decision-making process. Like, for example, at a university where it touches on significant areas and significant functions at the same time when you're choosing on an AI adoption strategy, because it will impact students and academics and the work that they do in very direct ways. Thirdly, thinking about how you govern and guide the adoption of these tools. This is kind of the stabilizing force having clear guardrails in place around data ethics, privacy, security. What happens when something goes wrong? It's what helps move from an experimentation place to a place of trust, and from chaos, a sense of chaos to control in collective sense making around use of these new tools. Then iterating and scaling is more about sustaining an effective adoption of these tools over time. Once pilots show traction, scale them up, but keep listening, know when to call the ones that don't work, the pilot projects. Remember that AI evolves fast, and so do teams and goals, depending on your industry and your function. So having a feedback loop alive is also really important. Talking to users, talking to employees, reviewing data, and adjusting course where needed without making that a chaotic process. So success here is not really a one-time win. It's this continuous alignment and refinement that can help lead to more sustainable evolution, a more adaptive innovation. So whatever an organization, wherever it sits on the hype cycle of say AI, kind of using the example on the slide, whether you're just exploring or scaling fast, having such an approach can help keep sense making at the center, because it's really not about blind adoption. It's about intentional, ethical, and human-led transformation, and that's one team, one pilot, one lesson at a time. Often more complex than that because you have people responsible for multiple things, but being able to distinguish those is really important. So as we begin to kind of draw the research, the presentation to a close, it's probably worth pausing on a theme that came through very powerfully across interviews and survey responses, and that's the ethics and responsibility and sustainability of AI adoption. So it's far from being a side concern. These questions and responses from the survey really cut to the heart of AI's long-term value and viability for organizations. A participant captured the core tension really well. They said the challenge is, when does my text stop being my text and start being something I automated or was augmented? That's the question of authorship and ownership. So across disciplines, we've heard how ethical considerations aren't just academic; they're emerging as possibly real blockers to progress. Another respondent said that ethics seem to get really tangled up in politics, which can slow down development. Others raised concern about the environmental footprint, saying it's hard to estimate the environmental impact without a full life cycle view. Some more offer a clear call to action, saying sustainability means accounting for the true cost to society of AI's energy and bandwidth use. And this really shows how sustainability and ethics are increasingly inseparable in some of the technologies and tools that we use, because they're so embedded into how we make sense of them and how we use these tools. So a lot of the participants pointed to the importance of aligning your AI operations with internationally recognized standards, be it ISO 9000, 14001. These help meet regulatory requirements and enhance long-term sustainability. But their message was really clear that ethical AI isn't necessarily also about slowing things down. It's about ensuring progress is purposeful and equitable, and future-proof, most importantly. And that was often one of the things that respondents said managers should take stock of. It's perfectly fine to say we shouldn't do this straight away because we're future-proofing by taking a step back and thinking a bit further, or more strategically or analytically. And also, as another participant said, often ethics just means applying the same standards of safety and good corporate conduct that we expect in other areas, and not letting any kind of hype or sense of immediacy make us rush through those in ways we wouldn't do for things we already have established. So the conversations also touched on education, equity, and global opportunity, and a participant reflected in the revolutionary potential of AI in learning. We don't know what a PhD will mean in a world with instant expert tools as they develop. What AI could do for international development could be extraordinary. Similar thoughts and sentiments were shared in the research. So these insights really kind of underscored the reasoning for the framework and how it must embed ethical considerations throughout, from pilot to scale of AI adoption, and from strategy to governance. And doing so doesn't mean being timid in any way, but it means being trustworthy, inclusive, resilient, sometimes patient, and sometimes have more considerate or aware rather than rushed in AI adoption. Okay, so I think I only have one more slide, and this kind of wraps things all up. So looking at the time, we have about 10 minutes. So I'll thank everyone for joining this afternoon. I hope this exploration of AI adoption and sense making is giving you some maybe practical insights to take back to your team or departments. Before wrapping up and opening the floor for any questions, and I'll stop sharing there so I can see the chat again. I just wanted to highlight a few resources that might help you continue on your learning and experimenting with AI. So firstly, a bit of a plug on what I work on at the university. Notable is the supported service for coding environments that the university provides them. That I've been the service manager of for a few years now. We focus on providing access to computational notebooks like Python, Jupyter notebooks are. So if you want to explore data science, machine learning projects in your courses, coding in your courses more generally, Notable can make it easier to set up and start coding. So it's a fully integrated subscription service for education institutions that are using virtual learning environments. For Edinburgh staff, there is a Notable user group on Teams. We have a number of kind of external user groups as well that have emerged across different institutions. And places like this are places where users share tips, seek help, or just stay informed about new features. We also have our generative AI hub for the university's of centralized LLM provision, ELM, education access to language models. It serves as a centralized, safer environment to access OpenAI's LLMs. So if you want to leverage LLMs without worrying about data privacy or security issues at the university, that's something you can go to. Just look up ELM, University of Edinburgh. And finally, if you're looking for broader training and guidance, there's a number of resources that are offered, again, at the university in People and Money and in LinkedIn Learning. There's also a lot about Jupyter AI that I'm more focused on, and on GitHub as well about interesting examples of using new forms of AI and that's the different businesses. And these offerings cover various aspects of building and maintaining and managing AI solutions. So remember to join the April Hub for the next Lunch and Learn that I begin is in early May. And again, thanks very much for joining this afternoon. I hope the journey through the research has been helpful for you. I'll leave you with this quote from one of the interviews that I quite liked. The sun is rising for the age of AI-enabled better business.